Right, learn these 4 positions. White to play as a win, black to play as a draw. White to play as a win, black to play as a draw. White to play as a win, black to play is a draw. White to play as a draw, black to play as a draw. Learn those 4 positions inside out. I'm not covering why they're won or why they're drawn. I mean, I'll say a little bit about it, but that's something I'll leave you to sort out. It's just that is such an important crossroads in rook versus pawn. Just learn those 4 positions. They're all white to play as a win, black to play as a draw, except for when it's a non-rook's pawn and the rook is on the 5th rank. Okay. And the reason for that is the following. Let's just go through. Let's go through this one actually. So you think, well, why isn't this a win? Okay, we play the rook check. We force the black king this way. It's just in this position because the rook's on the 5th rank that black can come and hit the rook. White's like, well, fine, I'll just move my rook back, c2, king e2, and when black queens, you win the queen. Done. Except black doesn't queen. Black knights with check. And that's a draw. That doesn't happen if it's not on the 5th rank, because king back here wouldn't hit the rook. White to play is a win, black to play is a draw. If it's a rook's pawn, why doesn't that 5th rank thing also cause trouble? Why is white to play still a win in this position? Well, the reason is that when the king comes back, pawn on king c2, a1 equals knight check, king c3, the knight's lost. Done. Very easy win for white there. So that's the reason that that trick doesn't work. Now, if it's a rook's pawn in this original position, white has 2 winning moves. The rook check and also king d2. It's worth knowing that second winning move. I'll say why in a sec. And that's true whether the rook's on the 5th rank. So just playing all these silly moves to get that same starting position. King d2 still wins. And it's all to do with the fact that if we play king d2 and black pushes the pawn, rook b5 check, the king can't go this way, so the king's forced this way. And we're actually going to get an incredibly similar position to before. This will have to become a knight, and then you've got king c3. It is 1. I suppose king a2, but you just play any old rook move backwards, and that's done it. So that's checkmate in 8, apparently. So yeah, it's worth knowing that if it's a rook's pawn, you have 2 winning moves, king d2 and rook b8 check, and that's regardless of whether it's a rook on the 5th rank or a rook not on the 5th rank. If it's a non-rook's pawn, you've only got 1 winning move here. Okay, because if you try king f2, c2, it's no good. Okay. And if the rook is already on the 5th rank, you have no winning moves. Okay, I mean, you still play on. You try and win rook versus knight because you know that's what's coming. Or you just play rook d5 check and hope your opponent doesn't even realise the rook versus knight thing that's coming up. Now it's in the one where it's a rook's pawn, because you've got 2 winning moves regardless. There's not really anything extra to say. You'd just always play this move anyway. And when it's a non-rook's pawn, you think, well, I kind of always play that move anyway. But it would be nice if there was a second winning move for this scenario. It'd be nice if that was a second winning move. Now, if the rook is behind the pawn already, then if we go back to the original position, if this rook is here, let's play some silly moves. This position, if the rook's behind the pawn, then this king f2 is a winning move. And it doesn't really matter which rank the rook's on, by the way. It doesn't, because the 5th rank, any old rank, if the rook's behind the pawn already, then this second winning move also wins. Now that's useful to remember, not because you're going to get into this position and choose your winning move, but just this king might have come in from over here. And then that was your winning move. There's a very good reason that the rook might be behind the pawn already, if this white king's had a bit of a journey to do from over here, say. And that's, you've probably, if you've been playing the attack properly, delivered a time gaining check en route. Now if you're the drawing side, you've got choices of how you can draw, but there's no reason to use that choice. Okay, if it's a rook's pawn, you have no choice. Okay, let's just play a useless move for white. This is now a draw, so white to play as a win, black to play as a draw. This is a draw, but you must play king b2. You absolutely must play king b2. a2 would lose with the same trick. We force your king to the edge of the board. And when rook b8 check comes in, you've got to play king c1. Okay, you can't put your king in front of the pawn. And then it is just a draw. Okay. So yeah, you must absolutely play back in this position king b2. Okay. Now if it's a non, and that's true whether the rook's on the 5th rank as well. So if I was to play rook h5, black has only one drawing move and it's king b2. You must play king b2. Don't push the a pawn for the same reasons. If it's a non-rook's pawn, you don't have to play. And if I just play a silly move for white, you've now got 2 drawing moves, c2 and king d2. But why would you want to learn the other way of doing it? I can't think of a single reason. Okay, if you get this position and it's you to play as the defending side, always do that, and then you don't have to remember, hang on, is it a rook's pawn where I can and can't do it? Just always push the king first, and you're fine. That's your drawing rule. So yeah, learn those 4 positions. That one's white to play as a win, black to play as a draw. That one's white to play as a draw, black to play as a draw. That one is white to play as a win, black to play as a draw. That one is white to play as a win, black to play as a draw. And then just make sure you also know that if it's the rook's pawn, if you're the defending side trying to draw, you always push the king, regardless of what pawn it is. If you're the attacking side and it's a rook's pawn, you've got 2 different winning moves. You can either do a check or play the king down. And if it's a non-rook's pawn, you've only got 1 winning move. But if your rook is already behind the pawn, which is very likely to be, given the various games situations that can lead to this, then this is your 2nd winning move. Okay, because the rook check doesn't do it. Okay, if your rook was on c5, let's just quickly go through it in case I haven't already. Let's play this silly move. I think I have done this already. So in this position here, rook d5 would lead to a draw. It's going to lead to a rook versus knight, whereas king f2 is a win. So it's definitely worth knowing that, and you'll see from the positions in a sec. So yeah, learn those positions inside out. Fill in the details yourselves over why they're a win or why they're a draw. But it's such an important position to remember. It's basically the same setup each time, and that the 4 combinations are rook's on the 5th rank or isn't. That's one, either or. And the other one is it's a rook's pawn or isn't. So it's a sort of 2x2 grid. They're all white to play as a win and black to play as a draw, except a non-rook's pawn where the rook is already on the 5th rank. Learn all of that inside out, and it's going to make every single position we do in the rest of this video pretty easy to solve, and hopefully it's going to make positions you get in your games pretty easy to solve. Because if you learnt that crossroads, it's actually that there's so many different positions that with sort of you count the moves down to that critical position, and then you just know that's a win or that's a draw. I'd even recommend stopping this video now watching it up again until this point, so you have to sort of, get those positions again and learn those positions. Really commit them to memory. That would be my recommendation. Anyway, let's start looking at some games. This is a game from 2007. It's white to play. In this position, to be honest, there's not really a lot to say because you haven't really got much choice in what you do here as white. This is lost, and maybe there might have been something that happened the move before this that should have made you realise this position's lost, but we can just count out the moves. I mean, the question in the book, by the way, all these positions I'm going through here, massive shout out to the Jesus de la Villa 100 Endgames book and the workbook. I think the question in it is, does white get anywhere playing rook takes a2? And the answer is no. I mean, you can try and count out the moves. There's something actually that's going on that's important to talk about, which I haven't talked about yet. But this is the square that the black king's going to. This is the square the white king's going to, and this is the pawn push. You've just got to count out the moves to that critical position and work out whether it's white to play or black to play, and hence whether it's a win or a draw, because the black rook's going to be on this rank, isn't it? Although there's one thing I haven't talked about yet, which is actually incredibly important here, in that if black doesn't do it, it's going to be a draw. So rook takes a2, rook takes a2, king takes f6. And now if you just count out the moves, I mean, black's, you got 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2. That's going to be white to play. That's going to be a draw, basically. So there's something else that you need to be aware of as the attacking side. And it's called the time-gaining check. And the time-gaining check, the point of it is we can come and check this white king here, because it's kind of like 2 ranks in front of its pawn. Any step this way, I mean, can't play king g7 because then you've lost the pawn to rook g2. But any step this way, and white's going to have to waste a move in a minute anyway, getting that king out from in front of its own pawn, as well as which you sort of move the king in the wrong direction. It wants to be sort of shouldering on this side. Okay, so white's best move here is probably king e6. King e6 is, yeah, I mean, that's what I would play, king e6, and hope that black doesn't play this. That's the time-gaining check. You force the white king back a rank. So before, when the king was on f6, white had 2 moves to get to that critical setup. This also, by the way, once you've performed the time-gaining check, your rook's behind the pawn. That's why I said it's just, your rook's often going to be behind the pawn already in these situations, because you're likely to have performed a time-gaining check. Sometimes it might not even be a time-gaining check. It's just you want the rook behind the pawn check. It's like you haven't actually gained a tempo other than it's going to be useful to have your rook behind the pawn. I've got a position coming up that shows that. And this is just 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's going to be black to play. It's a win. So yeah, king d4, g5, king d5, king f6, king d6, g6, black to play is a win. So yeah, in the original position, I mean, it's just bad luck for white. You should take on a2, because I can't see anything else you could do there. But if black plays the time-gaining check, you've had it. Right, next, this is a game from 2008. Pause the video if you like. This one, has black got a choice? Not really. Black hasn't really got much of a choice, have they? Because white's threatening this. And then it's queen versus pawn rather than rook versus pawn. So yeah, black hasn't really got much choice. But count it out and see, pause the video we're going to play rook takes a7 check, obviously king takes a7, and count it out. Do you reckon it's a win for white, sorry, or a draw? Try and factor in the time gaining check. It's a draw. So king f4. I think this is what actually happened in the game. I would have played king f3 there, to be honest, but I think king f3 was a better move, isn't the engine saying king f3? Yeah, it's one of them. Well, I suppose once the engine realises they're all drawn, it really doesn't care. Anyway, this isn't particularly a time gaining check, but it does get the rook behind the pawn, I suppose, which is useless, in fact, because the rook's not on the 5th rank, but fine. King b6, g4, king c5, king f3, king d4, g3, king d3. It's black to play. It's a draw. Well done. If you said it's going to be a draw, and hence in that original position, yeah, you can play rook takes a7 and offer that draw. Right, next. This is a game from 2007. It's white to play. Can white win this? What do you need to do first? I mean, this is actually just a subset of the positions we've already covered. I mean, it's a different game. White can win this, but they must perform the time gaining check. Hit the king, then behind the pawn, king to d4. In fact, I think this is a mirror image of the first one we covered, isn't it? King f5, c4, king f4, king d3, king f3, c3. It's white to play. It's a win. Next, 1991 game. Knight's pawns have got something extra about them, which isn't going to be relevant here. So in this video, I've only picked out positions involving knight's pawns where the fact that it's a knight's pawn isn't relevant, because there is something extra about knight's pawns that needs talking about, which I'll cover in another video. But this video is meant to be just learn those 4 basic positions and see how they apply in these games. So yeah, this is white to play, game from 1991. What are you going to do here? Can you win this? What would you do? Pause the video and decide. Lots of winning moves, because all you're going to do is shove your rook back to h8. Okay. g4. Okay. Now, this time it's not really a time gaining check, but it is important that we get our rook behind the pawn here. Okay. Because if we don't, you can see that, well, you can see you're sort of getting nowhere near the critical square here. Black's going to play g4 on their next move. But there's something extra going on, where we've got to get our rook behind the pawn. Rook f8 check, rook back to g8, king back to f3. Okay, so that's not really a time gaining check, but you have got your rook to g8 rather than on h8. And the reason that's important is white can now win with king c3, g3. Remember, if the king was on d3, you've got 2 winning moves. One of them's rook f8 check, and the other one is king d2. That king d2 second winning move only works if the rook is already behind the pawn, which it is. That's why you had to do that check behind the pawn, and then carry on, because now you can play. It's almost as if you've got king on d3 already, and you can play king d2. Yeah, so king d2, winning move. And this is clearly hopeless because of king e1, and if king f2, we're going to get the check in and start forcing the king that way. If I go into any more detail, I'm going to get into how these positions are won. I'm leaving that for you guys to just check out yourselves. Okay, I'll call it a prerequisite to the video. All I'm talking about is how to get to those crossroads, that 4 positions crossroads. And this is one of those extra ones. These sort of where it's important to understand that second way of winning. For a non-rook's pawn, you've got to have your rook behind the pawn already. So just a knowledge of that would have made it, would have enabled you to win this position, basically. Right, next. This is from 2001, this game. What would you do? Have you got any knowledge now that tells you whether rook takes h4 is any good as a move? You should have. Rook takes h4, f6, black to play as a win, white to play, black to play as a draw, white to play as a draw. This is the special case where even if it's black to play as a draw, because when the rook comes and hits the king, it comes back to f5. Rook drops back, f7, king d7, and we knight, and we draw it from there. I'm not getting into drawing king and knight versus king and rook, but it is technically a draw, even though there are some famous grandmaster games where some of the world's best players have failed to hold it against other famous grandmasters. Okay. But I won't mention which one, but I actually saw a grandmaster recently at a congress fail to hold this against a FIDE master, in fact. But yes, it's not easy, but it is technically a draw. So you shouldn't play rook takes h4. This pawn here is kind of irrelevant. It's not really that harmful. Okay. But so what you should play given that. By the way, if rook takes h4, if by some miracle you already had your rook behind the pawn, then you can play the second winning idea, which is king c7. But that second winning idea should be coming to you already. It turns out that rook e8 check is also a win here for black. But in terms of being thematic and consistent with what's being discussed, this second winning idea, king c7, is the one to have a go at, or the one to know. Sorry. So if the pawn moves forwards, king to d8, that's clearly hopeless for white. And if instead king to e7, trying to shoulder that king away, then you can take the pawn. f6, rook e4 check, and yeah, we're getting into the details of how it's a win for black. But yeah, this king can't come back and hassle that rook anymore. Next, this is a game from 2015. More work to do now. White to play. What would you do? Do you play rook a5? Or do you play a7? One of them wins, one of them draws. Can you work out which one? Both of them require knowledge of that rook versus pawn critical final position. So if you work through a7, rook has to take that because rook a5 was threatened. King takes a7. Now there could be in this position some issues with the fact that this is a knight's pawn here, but we don't have to make them issues particularly. King g4, king b6, king f4, king c5, g4, king d4, g3, king goes to d3, and well, king f3 is still a draw, but you are going to do, if you go for king f3, you're going to end up with the rook versus knight to defend. Okay, and in this position you've actually got the even simpler g2, rook has to come back to b1, king f3, and it's clearly drawn. So it's not quite the same as that critical position, because white never had their rook back here to in the right place. And white's rook was sort of awkwardly placed if they pushed a7. So in fact what they should do is play rook a5, and what on earth does black do here? I mean, I think rook a5 is probably the more natural move to play anyway, isn't it? I mean, they can check the white king, but the white king stops them coming to b8, and they're just sort of checking the white king. If you keep checking the white king, I mean, you're probably best off at this stage going back to c1, but if you just keep checking the king, it's just going to get some cover on g7. Oops. Then you've got to come back to d1 anyway, a7, rook d7 check, improve the king position again. I mean, it's just, you can see that's completely gone. And then if you played I mean, that's probably the better way of doing it without improving white's king position, is rook e1, a7, rook back to e8. But now you've improved the position of white's rook because it wants to come behind. And again, there's some trickery that white could do with the fact that it's a knight's pawn. So if I go king g4, I'm reasonably sure rook f8. Yeah, rook f8 is the best move, apparently. When it's a knight's pawn, there's other stuff we need to think about, but it's just not needed here. You can count out the king moves to here, and the fact we are going to be getting a time-gaining check if we want to. You can take that for granted. The time-gaining check means you can always, in these positions, think about your rooks already behind the pawn. You can take that as a sort of given. So it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's going to be fine, even without that time-gaining. I know we will need a time-gaining check if black plays king f3, which they should. Let's have a look. King c5, yeah, okay, so we do need a time-gaining check here. Rook f8 check, king e3, rook g8, king, get that king back to f4, king d4, g4, king d3, king f3. We seem to have gained a move there, or my counting was a load of rubbish. Did we not need that time-gaining check? Just out of interest. Let's have a look. Maybe we didn't. No, I just can't count. Fair enough. Good, isn't it? White to play is still a win. I'm not sure what happened there with my counting. Never mind, move on. Next. This game's from 2009. Black to play. I really paused the video on this one, really have a think about it. Because it's exactly the sort of position you could get in a game. This was a game from 2009. We're clearly about to lose our f1 rook for the c7 pawn. How are you going to lose it? How are you going to give it up? Bearing in mind the rook versus pawn situation that you're then going to be in. What's the critical square? If black's any good, they're going to bring their king here before they advance this pawn. Or it might have to come this way, advancing the pawn because the rook's hitting g5. But, you know, the black king's going to end up here. So where's the critical square for the white king in the sort of face-off situation? Well, it's here. So that's the path the white king wants to take. So if you play rook f7, the white king's got to unpin itself. King takes a6. But that's one of the moves white wanted to play anyway. Yeah, and then we'd take the pawn. If you play rook f8, then white can play, well, white can queen. But now the white king is one square further away from d3. They haven't played king a6 already. So rook f8 was the correct one. Rook f7, you pin the pawn, king takes a6, forces this capture. I mean, the white rook was either going to end up here or here, and they're both sort of like the same, aren't they, really? You know, g7 or g8, neither of those, they're the same square as far as black's concerned. Unless the rook's closer, like the 5th rank, these squares are just the same. So rook f8 meant that the white king is going to be here. Rook f7 meant the white king is going to be here. So you would choose rook f8. This is the rook f7, takes, and then we get on with it. You've got to play the time-gaining check. There it is. White to play as a win. black to play is a draw. And that's white to play. So black's lost that. So rook f7 throws away the game. Instead, rook f8, takes, time gaining check, sure, takes. White to play is a win, black to play is a draw. And it's black to play, so it's a draw. Next, this is a game from 1991. Black to play. Can black win this? Pause the video and decide. Now, king d6 might still win it if white doesn't know what they're doing, or is not able to draw the resultant. This is going to now be knight versus rook. And the fact there's a knight's pawn promotion is one of the more difficult ones to draw, but not covered by this video. You know, have a go at not defending knight versus rook against Stockfish, starting with a knight on g8. The secret is just not to, by the way, it's just a general principle, is to not let your knight get too far away from the king. Keep your knight and king close if you ever end up in this position. I'm pretty sure even with that principle, I'm sure I balls it up against Stockfish, but never mind. Anyway, black doesn't want to get involved in that. Rook versus knight. Black wants to keep it nice and tidy. So we can do the time gaining check. This is a non-rook's pawn. It doesn't really gain any time because you're going to go check, king moves, rook moves, king comes back to f6. You haven't gained any time particularly, but you have stuck your rook behind the pawn. And that's massively useful because when we play king d6 and white plays g6, because it's a rook on the 5th rank from the black perspective, there's only one winning move, but we know it is a winning move, king d7. That's the second winning move for a non-rook's pawn when the rook's already behind the pawn, regardless of whether that rook's on the 5th rank or not. And yeah, it's just so useful to know that, because you just know in this position, you'll do your, like I say, it's not a time gaining check, but it is a, what would you call it, a sort of position gaining check. You get your rook behind the pawn, and that's useful because here you don't want to play rook f4 check because it's going to lead to rook versus knight. You do want to play king d7, which is the second winning move for a non-rook's pawn when your rook is already behind that non-rook's pawn. Next, 1996, black to play, obviously, because black is in check. What do you take with? Do you take with the king? Do you take with the rook? What would you go for? I mean, just as a general principle, we know that we want to get our king back to that square, really. The only possible disadvantage of taking with the rook is that you're going to end up with a rook on the 5th rank from black's perspective. So I guess you just got to count out the moves. So let's have a look at it. If we take with the king, let's do the king first. King takes h4. c5, we'll do the time gaining check. Fine. Rook here, king here. King g5, c6, king f6, and draw. White to play as a draw. If the king had been on g6, then we know that that move is a win because the rook's already behind the pawn, but the black king can't get there, so it's a draw. So instead you should play rook takes h4, c5, got to do the, again it's not time gaining check, but it is sort of a position gaining check, get that rook behind the pawn. King f6, c6, only one winning move here, which surely we've learnt by now. It's not this, it's not that check, that's going to lead to rook versus knight, but king f7 is the second winning move, when the rook's already behind the pawn. Hopefully you're seeing by now why I said earlier on that it's very likely your rook will already be behind the pawn, and that's why it's worth knowing that second winning move. And it's because you've done the time gaining check. That was the reason it was very likely. Right, last one. This is black to play, and this one's probably getting a bit harder actually out of all of them. Yeah, in fact, this is very hard. This one. But what isn't hard, I don't think, is to calculate what would happen if black plays, or maybe this is hard anyway actually, what would happen if black plays rook takes a6, check? Can you count out the moves to the critical position and decide, has white got a way to win that easily, in fact? Yeah, no, sorry, I think that isn't difficult. I think you can calculate. I think we can all calculate if rook takes a6 check, can white just sort of do a very basic winning maneuver? This is clearly going to be the critical face-off. Okay, black king's going to come to f3, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and we've got 1, 2, 3. Plus the rooks had to disappear up here, but there's going to be a time gaining check involved somewhere, possibly that time gain effectively. Count out the moves, see what you think. So rook takes a6 check, king takes a6, king f4. So yeah, the black king can't come to f3 straight away because rook g5 just wins the pawn. I mean, I suppose they could try pushing the g pawn straight away, but we're still going to force the black king to come to f4. If we just go rook b8 or rook b7. So if black tries this, check, there, king f4, and that's going to transpose effectively. So let's try instead king f4, rook b8, g5, check, there, back, king f4, king b5, g4, king c4, king f3, king d3, g3. White to play is a win. So it's a win. Black to play is a draw. Now the position you're going to get instead by not playing rook takes a6 is kind of more complicated. There's more stuff going on, but it's not too far away from. It's only more complicated by the fact that the white rook isn't sort of politely up here to come from behind and and get us to that classic critical position. The four positions: white plays a win, black plays a draw. Those positions. Yeah, it's just that the rook's going to be on this rank. That's the problem. But it's not a million miles away. Let's just go through it. G5 is the way that black can draw this, and obviously white's going to play rook a5. A7 is clearly drawn. You just take it, and the white king's even further away. And this isn't too dissimilar to one of the positions we had earlier, where the black rook's got to try and get back somehow. Rook b4 check, king c7. But now we can play. In fact, there's only one drawing move here, so tricky to find, to be honest. Rook f4. Okay. A7. Rook back to f8. I guess rook f4 was good because the king couldn't stop the rook getting to f8, and then queen takes, and now actually it's the same setup, isn't it? King f3. There's your time gaining check, and this time the white king's just not in time. White to play is a win, black to play is a draw. This is a draw. But the thing that made that more difficult, in my view, was g5, rook a5, Rook b4 is not a difficult move to find. Rook b4 check because the king's got to go back to c7 to cover b8. The move I think that was difficult to find possibly was rook f4. I suppose that you've got to get back to... Maybe it's not that difficult to find. I mean, you could keep... It's similar to the position earlier. If you just keep checking the white king, you're just going to improve its position for white. Similarly, if you went to rook e4, white's going to do this, and then you've either got to go to f4 anyway and improve the white king position, or come back to b4 or something, or c4 to deliver a check to pick up the pawn. All the time the white king's going this way and you're improving its position. So yeah, maybe rook f4 wasn't that hard to find. And then you've got to count it out from there. But what we do know, because we can count it out, is that rook takes a6 check is lost, because you are going to incur the time gaining check, and you could just count it out down to here. White to play as a win, black to play as a draw. It's white to play, so black's lost that. So 10 different games. Learn those 4 positions inside out, and in the next video I'll cover the same principle but some harder positions that with a few more twists in them. Every position we've looked at there had what was I going to say? It didn't have any complications in it. So the knight's pawns make things more difficult, or there's some extra trickery the attacking side can do by keeping the king stuck to the side of the board. So white's got a few more tricks up their sleeves, or the attacking side has. And what's the other thing I was going to say? Oh yes, all the ones we've looked at are where the defending side's king has been shouldering away the attacker's king, whereas sometimes the defending side's king hasn't been able to get there yet, and it's sort of stuck on the other side, or the attacking side can play moves where if they don't do such and such, then the defending side's going to get their king to the shouldering side, and it all comes down to this position, which is going to be a draw. But if they did something clever at the start, then they can get the king to the other side. And when the king's on the other side, it's not, the attacking side's got more time. And it's literally just a case of counting. Can the white king get here before the black king is here and the pawn has got to here? Again, the knight's pawns just made that a bit more interesting. Anyway, I'll cover those sorts of things in the next video, but learn those 4 positions inside out would be my advice.